Tonight, I'm telling you about a girl who was starved, beaten, and erased by her own mother, until the most dangerous man in the North saw what everyone else refused to see. What happened next will blow your mind. Stay until the end to find out how she went from sleeping in a freezing attic to holding her entire family's fate in her hands. If you're watching from New York, London, Tokyo, or anywhere else, drop your city in the comments and smash that like button. Let's get into it. The first thing Clara Whitlock learned was how to make herself invisible. Not literally, of course, but close enough. She learned to walk without sound, to breathe without drawing attention, to exist in the narrow spaces between other people's needs. She learned that speaking invited punishment, that hunger was safer than asking, that bruises hidden under sleeves hurt less than the ones her mother could see and mock. She was 14 years old. The Whitlock estate sat on the ragged edge of the Northern Territories, a crumbling monument to a family that had once mattered. 3 stories of gray stone, drafty hallways, and rooms that smelled like mildew and old money running out. Beyond the iron gates lay endless fields of frozen dirt, skeletal trees, and a sky that stayed pale and hard from October to April. Inside, the house was split into 2 worlds. Upstairs was warmth, fires in every room, thick rugs, the smell of roasted meat and buttered bread, laughter, music, the rustle of silk and the clink of crystal. That was where Clara's mother, Vivian Whitlock, held court. That was where Clara's siblings, Edmund, Louisa, and Margot, lived like minor royalty, even though the family coffers were bleeding dry. Downstairs was Clara. The kitchen, the scullery, the storage rooms, the attic, where she slept on a cot that sagged in the middle and let the cold seep through the thin blanket like water through cheesecloth. She woke before dawn, worked until her hands cracked, ate scraps if there were any, and collapsed at night too exhausted to dream. She had no friends, no allies, no escape. Her father had disappeared 3 years ago. Officially, he'd died overseas in a business venture gone wrong. Vivian had worn black for exactly 1 week, then moved on. Clara didn't believe the story, but she had no proof, no power, and no one who cared enough to listen. So she survived. That was all. It was a Tuesday in late November when everything started to crack. Clara was scrubbing the kitchen floor, her knees aching against the cold stone, when her mother swept in like a storm front. Vivian Whitlock was a beautiful woman, in the way a knife is beautiful, sharp, cold, and designed to cut. She wore a deep green dress that probably cost more than the servant's wages for a year, her dark hair pinned in an elaborate twist, her mouth painted the color of old wine. She didn't look at Clara. She never did. "The Northwoods are coming for dinner tomorrow," Vivian said to the housekeeper, Mrs. Allen, who stood near the stove looking nervous. "Duke Blackthorne himself. I want everything perfect. Everything. Do you understand?" Mrs. Allen nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." "The dining room must gleam. Fresh flowers. The good china. And for God's sake, make sure that thing," she gestured vaguely toward Clara without looking, "stays out of sight. I won't have her ruining the evening." Clara kept scrubbing. She'd learned long ago not to react. "She'll stay in the kitchen," Mrs. Allen said quietly. "Good." Vivian turned on her heel and left, her skirts whispering against the floor. Clara's hands were shaking. She gripped the brush harder, forcing herself to breathe evenly. Mrs. Allen waited until the footsteps faded, then sighed. "I'm sorry, child." Clara didn't answer. What was there to say? The truth was, she'd stopped expecting kindness years ago. Mrs. Allen meant well, but meaning well didn't change anything. It didn't put food in Clara's stomach or warmth in her bones. It didn't stop Vivian from treating her like a stain that needed scrubbing out. Clara finished the floor in silence, her back aching, her fingers raw from the lye soap. When she was done, she hauled the bucket outside to dump the dirty water. The November wind hit her like a fist, cutting through her thin dress. She had no coat. Vivian had sold it last winter, claiming Clara didn't need one since she barely went outside. The sky was the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of snow. Clara stood there for a moment, letting the cold numb her face, her hands. Sometimes the physical pain was easier than the other kind. When she came back inside, Bess the cook was pulling a chicken from the oven. "You eat yet?" Bess asked without looking up. No, ma'am. There's bread in the pantry. Take a piece before Edmund comes sniffing around. Clara's stomach clenched with hunger, but she hesitated. Mrs. Whitlock says a lot of things. Bess shot her a hard look. You want to starve to prove a point? That's your business, but you're no good to anyone dead. Clara slipped into the pantry and grabbed a small piece of bread, shoving it into her mouth before anyone could stop her. It was stale, but it tasted like heaven. When she emerged, Bess was watching her with something that might have been pity. You're too thin, Bess said bluntly, even for a girl your age. Clara didn't answer. What could she say? Yes, I'm starving. Yes, my mother would rather I disappear. Yes, I'm so tired I can barely stand most days. Instead, she said, What do you need me to do next? Bess shook her head but didn't push it. Peel potatoes. We'll need at least 20 for tomorrow. Clara got to work. The Northwoods. Even Clara, isolated as she was, knew the name. Rowan Blackthorne, Duke of Northwood, was the kind of man people whispered about. He controlled a vast stretch of the northern territories, mining, timber, trade routes. He was brutally efficient, ruthlessly fair, and completely uninterested in the games the southern aristocracy played. Rumor had it he'd killed a man in a duel at 17. Rumor also had it he'd never lost a contract negotiation, a legal battle, or a fight. He was 32, unmarried, untouchable, and he was coming to dinner. Clara didn't care. The Northwoods could come and go. It had nothing to do with her. She was furniture, background noise, a shadow in the corner that no one acknowledged. She spent the rest of the day working, peeling potatoes, scrubbing pots, hauling firewood from the shed to the kitchen. Her hands were blistered, her shoulders burned, and by the time the sun set, she could barely keep her eyes open. Mrs. Allen found her slumped against the counter. Go on up to bed, the housekeeper said gently. Tomorrow's going to be worse. Clara nodded and dragged herself up the back stairs to the attic. The narrow staircase was dark, the steps creaking under her weight. At the top, she pushed open the door to her room, if you could call it that. The attic was freezing. There was no fireplace, no stove, just a tiny window that let in drafts and a sliver of moonlight. The cot sat against one wall, a thin blanket folded on top. A cracked basin and pitcher stood on an upturned crate. That was it. Clara poured a little water into the basin and scrubbed her face and hands. The water was ice cold, and her fingers went numb almost immediately. She dried them on her skirt and climbed into bed fully dressed. The blanket did almost nothing against the cold. She curled into a tight ball, tucking her hands under her arms, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. It never did. Instead, she lay there in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the window, and thought about her father. She remembered him as a kind man, distant, maybe, always busy with business matters she didn't understand. But he'd never been cruel. He used to bring her books when she was little, teach her to read in the library while Vivian was out visiting neighbors. Then one day, he was gone. Vivian had gathered them all in the drawing room and announced it with the emotion of someone reading a grocery list. Your father is dead. There was an accident overseas. We will mourn appropriately and move forward. Edmund had nodded solemnly, already trying to look like the man of the house. Louisa had cried delicately into a handkerchief. Margot had stared at the floor. Clara had felt nothing, or maybe everything, all at once, so much that it canceled itself out. But she didn't believe it. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the way Vivian's eyes had gleamed when she said it. Maybe it was the speed with which she'd sold off his things, redecorated his study, erased him from the house like he'd never existed. Or maybe Clara just couldn't accept that he'd leave her here, alone, with her. Either way, it didn't matter. He was gone, and Clara was still here, and that was the only truth that counted. She finally fell asleep sometime after midnight, shivering under the thin blanket, her dreams filled with cold and darkness. The next day started before dawn. Clara woke to the sound of someone pounding on the attic door. Get up! Edmund's voice sharp and impatient. Mother wants you downstairs, now! Clara sat up, her whole body aching. For a moment she didn't know where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The dinner, the Northwoods, the endless work ahead. She pulled herself out of bed, splashed water on her face, and hurried downstairs. The kitchen was already chaos. Bess was shouting orders at two hired girls from the village. Mrs. Allen was rushing around with lists and linens. Pots bubbled on the stove. The air smelled like roasting meat and burning sugar. "There you are," Mrs. Allen said when she saw Clara. "Start with the silver. Every piece needs polishing. Then the floors in the dining room and the front hall. And for heaven's sake, stay out of sight once the guests arrive." Clara nodded and got to work. The silver took hours. There were platters, candlesticks, serving spoons, forks, knives, all of it tarnished from months of neglect. Clara scrubbed each piece until her arms burned and her fingers were black with polish. While she worked, she heard Vivian upstairs, her voice carrying through the floorboards. "Edmund, stand up straight. You look like a beggar." "Louisa, for the last time, you cannot wear that dress. It makes you look like a milkmaid." "Margot, stop fidgeting. You're 13, not a child." Clara kept her head down and kept working. Around midday, Louisa drifted into the kitchen, trailing perfume and boredom. "Is there anything to eat?" she asked, wrinkling her nose at the chaos. "I'm starving." Bess pointed to a plate of sandwiches without looking up. "Help yourself." Louisa grabbed one and bit into it, leaning against the counter. Her eyes drifted to Clara. "You look terrible," she said, not unkindly, just factual. Clara didn't respond. "Mother says you're to stay down here tonight," Louisa continued. "Don't even think about coming upstairs. The Duke is very important, and we can't have you, you know." She waved her hand vaguely. "I know," Clara said quietly. Louisa studied her for a moment, something like pity flickering across her face. Then it was gone. "You should try harder," she said. "Maybe if you weren't so—" She trailed off, searching for the word. "Pathetic. Things would be different." Clara's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Louisa shrugged and left, taking another sandwich with her. Alone again, Clara focused on the silver. She didn't let herself think. Thinking was dangerous. It led to questions, and questions led to hope, and hope was the cruelest thing of all. By evening, the house was transformed. The dining room gleamed, candles burned in every holder, fresh flowers sat in crystal vases. The good china was laid out, each plate positioned perfectly. The whole place smelled like beeswax and roses and expensive wine. Upstairs, Vivian and the others were getting dressed. Clara could hear the rustle of fabric, the click of jewelry, the low murmur of conversation. She stayed in the kitchen, helping Bess with the final preparations. At 7 o'clock, the sound of hooves on gravel announced the arrival of the guests. Mrs. Allen rushed to the front hall. Clara heard the door open, heard voices. Vivian's bright and brittle, a man's low and calm. "Your Grace, what an honor. Please, come in." "Mrs. Whitlock." Clara froze. The voice was deep, measured, and completely devoid of warmth. It wasn't rude exactly, just controlled, like every word was chosen carefully, weighed and released only when necessary. "May I take your coat?" That was Mrs. Allen, her voice nervous. "Thank you." Footsteps. More voices. Then Vivian again, louder now, playing the gracious hostess. "Please, this way. Dinner is nearly ready. I do hope you're hungry." The voices faded as they moved toward the drawing room. Clara exhaled slowly. "You all right?" Bess asked, glancing at her. "Fine." "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Clara repeated. Bess didn't look convinced, but she let it go. Ickies. Dinner was served at 8. Clara helped carry the dishes up the back stairs and set them on the sideboard in the dining room. She moved quickly, quietly, keeping her eyes down. But she couldn't help stealing a glance at the table. Vivian sat at the head, radiant in a gown of deep silver, her hair piled high, her smile sharp and dazzling. Edmund sat to her left, trying to look important in a coat that was slightly too big for him. Louisa and Margot flanked the other side, both dressed like they were attending a royal ball. And at Vivian's right sat Rowan Blackthorne. Clara's first thought was that he didn't belong here. Not because he wasn't refined. He was. His clothes were expensive, perfectly tailored, black as midnight. His posture was perfect, his hand steady as he reached for his wine glass. But there was something about him that didn't fit the room. He was too solid, too real, like he'd been carved out of stone while everyone else was made of paper. His face was hard, sharp jaw, high cheekbones, dark hair brushed back from his forehead, and his eyes, gray, cold, unreadable. Those eyes flicked toward Clara the moment she entered. Most people looked through her. Vivian had perfected it. Edmund enjoyed it. Even the servants did it without thinking. But Rowan Blackthorne looked at her. Clara froze, her heart stuttering. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't pity. It was something else. Something that made her feel exposed, like he could see straight through her skin to the bones underneath. The moment lasted maybe 2 seconds. Then his gaze moved away, back to Vivian, who was talking about something inconsequential. Clara set the wine on the sideboard with shaking hands and turned to leave. Wait. The voice stopped her mid-step. Vivian's smile faltered. Your Grace? Rowan was looking at Clara again. Who is she? The room went silent. Clara felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Her face burned. Vivian's laugh was thin, forced. Oh, just a housemaid, no one important. She looks half-starved. The words fell like stones into a still pond. Clara's breath caught. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to be anywhere but here. Vivian's expression tightened, but her smile stayed in place. I assure you, Your Grace, our staff is well cared for. Is she your daughter? Louisa gasped. Edmund's face went red. Margot stared at her plate. Vivian's smile turned brittle. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Answer the question. His tone didn't change, but something in the room shifted. The air felt heavier, colder. Vivian looked like she'd been slapped. For a moment, she said nothing, then, in a voice like ice, She is a distant relation. We've taken her in out of charity. Charity. Rowan's tone didn't change, but something in his eyes did. She's bleeding through her sleeve. Clara glanced down. He was right. She'd cut herself earlier on a broken plate, wrapped it poorly with a strip of cloth, and forgotten about it. A dark stain had seeped through the fabric of her dress. Clumsy girl, Vivian said quickly, her voice bright and dismissive. Always injuring herself. We do what we can, but some people simply cannot be helped. Is that so? It wasn't a question. Vivian's smile wavered. Your Grace, How old is she? 14, I believe. You believe, but Vivian's hands tightened on her napkin. It's difficult to keep track of every detail when one is running an estate. She's your daughter, and you don't know how old she is. The words were quiet, calm, but they cut through the room like a blade. Edmund cleared his throat. Your Grace, with all due respect, family matters are not your concern? Rowan's gaze shifted to him. You're right, they're not. But cruelty is. Edmund's mouth snapped shut. Rowan stood. He wasn't tall, maybe 6 feet, but he seemed to fill the room. The candlelight caught on his face, throwing shadows across his jaw, his eyes. He looked at Clara again. This time she saw it clearly. Anger. Not at her. For her. What's your name? He asked. Clara's throat was dry. She could feel Vivian's glare burning into the side of her head. Clara, she whispered. Clara what? She hesitated. Answer him, Vivian said sharply. Clara swallowed. Whitlock. Rowan's jaw tightened. He turned to Vivian, and when he spoke, his voice was colder than the winter outside. You're starving your own daughter. That is a gross exaggeration. I can see her ribs through her dress. Your Grace, I must protest. Protest all you want. He picked up his coat from the back of his chair. This dinner is over. Vivian stood, her composure cracking. You can't just... I can. He looked at Clara one more time, and his voice softened, just slightly. You deserve better than this. Then he walked out. The door slammed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. Then Vivian turned to her. Her face was twisted with fury, with something darker, something that had been building for years. What did you do? She hissed. Clara's voice came out broken. I didn't. You embarrassed me. You ruined this. Mother. I didn't say anything. Vivian crossed the room in 3 strides and struck Clara across the face. The blow sent Clara stumbling backward. She hit the sideboard, knocking a glass to the floor. It shattered. You are nothing, Vivian said, her voice shaking. You have always been nothing, and you will never be anything more. Clara's cheek throbbed. Tears burned in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Edmund stood. Mother, maybe. Get her out of my sight. Clara didn't wait. She turned and ran. She didn't stop until she reached the attic. She slammed the door, locked it, and collapsed onto the cot. Her whole body was shaking. Her face burned where Vivian had hit her. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to press them against her knees to make them stop. You deserve better than this. The words echoed in her head. She didn't believe them. She couldn't. Because if she let herself believe them, if she let herself hope for even a second, it would destroy her when reality came crashing back. But for the first time in 3 years, someone had seen her, and that terrified her more than anything. She didn't sleep that night. She lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside. Her mind raced. What would happen now? Would Vivian punish her more? Would she be locked in the attic for days like last time? Would they take away even the scraps she was allowed to eat? Or would nothing change at all? That was the worst possibility. That tomorrow would come, and the day after, and the day after that, and everything would be exactly the same. That she'd go back to scrubbing floors and peeling potatoes and disappearing into the walls, and no one would ever see her again. She pressed her hands over her face and tried to breathe. Somewhere deep inside, in a place she'd locked away years ago, something stirred. Hope. She hated it. She tried to crush it, but it wouldn't die. You deserve better than this. She wanted to believe it. She was so tired of not believing it. 3 days later, a carriage arrived at the Whitlock estate. Clara was in the kitchen, scrubbing pots, when Mrs. Allen came to find her. The housekeeper's face was pale. Her hands were shaking. Clara, she said quietly, you need to come upstairs. Why? Just come. Clara set down the pot and followed her up the back stairs, her stomach churning. When they reached the front hall, she stopped. Vivian stood near the door, rigid with fury. Her face was white, her hands clenched at her sides. Edmund was beside her, looking murderous. Louisa and Margot hovered near the stairs, wide-eyed and silent. And in the center of the room stood Rowan Blackthorne. He looked exactly as he had at dinner, calm, controlled, unshakable. But there was something different in his eyes now, something sharper. This is absurd, Vivian was saying, her voice shaking. You have no right. I have every right. Rowan held up a folded document. Legal guardianship. Signed by a magistrate this morning. She's leaving with me. Clara's heart stopped. Vivian laughed, but it sounded hysterical. You can't just take her. I already have. He looked past Vivian directly at Clara. Pack your things. You're coming to Northwood. Clara couldn't move, couldn't breathe. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Vivian stepped forward, her face twisted with rage. She's mine. She was never yours. Rowan's voice was quiet, but it cut like a blade. You don't own her. You don't deserve her. And as of today, you have no legal claim to her. He turned and walked toward Clara. Up close, she could see the hardness in his eyes, the tension in his jaw. But when he spoke, his voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. Do you have anything you want to take? Clara shook her head. She owned nothing. Nothing worth taking anyway. Then let's go. He offered his hand. Clara stared at it. This had to be a trick, a trap. People didn't just save people. Not in her world. Not for nothing. But his hand stayed steady, waiting. And slowly, barely believing it, Clara reached out and took it. His hand was warm, solid, real. Vivian screamed something behind them, but Clara didn't hear it. She was walking toward the door, her hand in Rowan Blackthorne's, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break. The carriage waited outside, black and sleek and utterly foreign. Rowan helped her inside. The seats were soft. The interior smelled like leather and wood smoke and something else. Safety. He climbed in after her, closed the door, and knocked twice on the roof. The carriage lurched forward. Clara looked back through the window. The Whitlock estate grew smaller and smaller, swallowed by the gray November sky. She was leaving, she was free, and she had absolutely no idea what came next. The journey to Northwood took 2 days. Clara spent most of it pressed against the carriage window, watching the landscape change. The frozen fields gave way to dense forest, then to rocky hills dotted with snow. The sky stayed gray, heavy with winter, and the cold seeped through the glass until her breath fogged against it. Rowan sat across from her, silent. He didn't try to make conversation, didn't ask questions, just sat there, reading documents or staring out his own window, giving her space she didn't know what to do with. Clara didn't know what to say anyway. Her mind was still spinning. She kept expecting to wake up, to find herself back in the attic. This whole thing nothing but a fever dream brought on by cold and hunger. But the carriage kept moving. The wheels rattled over frozen ground, and Rowan Blackthorn stayed real. They stopped once the first night at an inn. Rowan got them separate rooms. Clara's had a bed with actual blankets, a fireplace that someone had already lit, and a tray of food waiting on the table. She stared at it for a full minute before she believed it was for her. Bread, cheese, roasted chicken, soup that was still steaming, an apple. Her hands shook as she reached for the bread. She ate slowly at first, then faster, unable to stop herself. She hadn't realized how hungry she was, how empty. When she was done, she sat on the edge of the bed and cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, exhausted tears that she couldn't hold back anymore. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand why Rowan had done this. And she was terrified, absolutely terrified, that it would all be taken away. The next morning, they continued north. The forest grew thicker. The air got colder. Clara wrapped herself in the blanket Rowan had left in the carriage and tried not to think too hard about what came next. Around midday, Rowan spoke for the first time since they'd left the inn. "Are you warm enough?" Clara looked up, startled. "Yes." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll be there by nightfall." "Where?" "Northwood, my estate." Clara swallowed. What? What happens when we get there?" "You'll have a room, food, clothes, safety." He paused. "And time." "Time for what?" "To heal." The word hit her harder than she expected. She looked away, focusing on the trees passing by outside. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said quietly. Rowan was silent for a moment. Then, "You reminded me of someone." "Who?" "Myself." Clara looked at him, but his expression gave nothing away. "I'm not expecting anything from you," he said. "No debts? No obligations. You're free to leave when you're ready. But until then, you're under my protection. Do you understand?" Clara nodded, even though she didn't. Not really. Protection. The word felt foreign, like something from a language she'd never learned. Northwood was nothing like the Whitlock estate. It was a fortress. Built from dark stone, it sat on a hill overlooking a valley of pine trees and frozen streams. Tall walls surrounded it, and the windows were narrow, more practical than decorative. Smoke rose from multiple chimneys, and lanterns glowed in the gathering dusk. The carriage rolled through the gates and stopped in a courtyard. Rowan climbed out first, then offered Clara his hand. She took it, stepping down onto cobblestones that were slick with frost. The cold hit her immediately, sharper than anything she'd felt before. This wasn't the damp, miserable cold of the Whitlock estate. This was northern cold, the kind that could kill you if you weren't careful. A man approached, older, gray-haired, dressed in dark wool. He looked at Rowan, then at Clara, his expression carefully neutral. "Your Grace," he said, "welcome back. Marcus." Rowan nodded toward Clara. "This is Clara Whitlock. She'll be staying with us. See that she's given the East Room and everything she needs." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't question it. "Of course." "And send for Dr. Hale. Tonight." "Is she injured?" "Just do it." Marcus bowed. "Right away." Rowan turned to Clara. "Marcus is the head steward. If you need anything, ask him. He'll take care of you." Before Clara could respond, a woman appeared in the doorway, middle-aged, sturdy, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. "Your Grace," she said, then looked at Clara. Her gaze swept over her, taking in the too-thin frame, the ill-fitting dress, the bruises still visible on her arms. Her expression softened. "And you must be Clara. I'm Mrs. Brennan. Come inside before you freeze." Clara followed her into the house. The interior was warm. Fires burned in massive hearths, and the air smelled like wood smoke and something baking. The walls were stone, the floors dark wood, and everything felt solid, permanent. Mrs. Brennan led her up a wide staircase to the second floor, then down a hallway to a door near the end. "This is yours," she said, pushing it open. Clara stepped inside and stopped. The room was bigger than the entire attic at the Whitlock estate. A bed with thick blankets sat against one wall. A fireplace crackled softly. There was a wardrobe, a desk, a chair by the window. Rugs covered the floor. Candles burned on the mantel. It was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. "I'll have a bath drawn," Mrs. Brennan said, "and we'll find you some proper clothes. You're about the same size as my daughter, I think. She left some things behind when she married." Clara turned to her, her throat tight. I can't. Can't what? Pay for any of this." Mrs. Brennan's expression softened further. "You don't need to pay for anything, child. His Grace has made that clear. You're a guest here. You're safe." That word again. Safe. Clara didn't know what to do with it. The bath was hot, almost too hot. Clara sank into it slowly, her muscles unclenching for the first time in years. The water turned gray with dirt, and Mrs. Brennan had to change it twice before Clara was actually clean. Afterward, she was given a nightgown, soft, clean, warm, and sent to bed. Clara climbed under the blankets and lay there, staring at the ceiling. She should have felt relief, gratitude, something. Instead, she felt numb and scared, because this couldn't last. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her. Something would go wrong. Someone would take it away. Or she'd wake up and find out it had all been a dream. She pulled the blankets tighter and closed her eyes. Dr. Hale arrived the next morning. He was younger than Clara expected, maybe 40, with graying hair and kind eyes. He examined her quietly, asking questions she didn't know how to answer. How long had she been malnourished? Years. How often had she been hit? Often enough. Did anything hurt? Everything. He wrote notes, gave Mrs. Brennan a list of instructions, and left without saying much. Clara sat on the edge of the bed afterward, feeling exposed. Mrs. Brennan brought her breakfast: eggs, toast, porridge, tea, more food than Clara usually ate in a week. "Eat what you can," the housekeeper said gently. "Don't force it. Your stomach needs time to adjust." Clara managed half of it before she felt sick. Mrs. Brennan didn't push. She just took the tray and told Clara to rest. Rest. Another foreign concept. Clara had never rested in her life. She'd worked until she collapsed, slept until someone woke her, and started again. The idea of just lying here, doing nothing, felt wrong. But she didn't know what else to do. So she lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Days passed. Clara didn't see much of Rowan. He was busy, Mrs. Brennan said, managing the estate, meeting with business partners, traveling to nearby towns. Clara didn't mind. She wasn't sure she could face him anyway. Instead, she stayed in her room mostly. She ate the meals Mrs. Brennan brought. She sat by the fire. She stared out the window at the snow-covered valley below. Slowly, the numbness began to crack. And underneath it was something worse. Anger. Not at Rowan, not at Mrs. Brennan or Marcus or anyone at Northwood, at herself. Because she'd let it happen. She'd let Vivian break her. She'd let Edmund mock her. She'd let them all treat her like she was nothing, and she'd believed it. She'd believed she deserved it. And now, sitting in this warm room with a full stomach and clean clothes, she didn't know who she was supposed to be. 2 weeks after she arrived, Rowan knocked on her door. Clara was sitting by the window, wrapped in a blanket, when she heard it. "Come in," she said quietly. The door opened, and Rowan stepped inside. He looked the same as always, dark clothes, hard expression, eyes that saw too much. "How are you?" he asked. Clara didn't know how to answer that. "I'm fine." "Mrs. Brennan says you barely eat." I eat. Not enough. Clara looked away. I'm trying. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her. It was strange seeing him here. He seemed too big for the space, too solid. I'm not good at this, he said finally. At what? Talking, comforting people, any of it. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. But I need you to understand something. Clara looked at him. You're not a prisoner here, he said. You're not a servant. You're not a burden. You're a person who deserves to be treated like one. And I know that's hard to believe right now. But it's true. Clara's throat tightened. Why do you care? Because no one cared about me when I needed it. His voice was flat, emotionless. And I swore that if I ever had the power to change that for someone else, I would. Clara stared at him. What happened to you? That's not important. It is to me. Rowan was silent for a long moment. Then, my father was a drunk. My mother died when I was young. I grew up in a house where survival meant staying out of sight and keeping your mouth shut. Sound familiar? Clara's breath caught. I got out, Rowan continued. Joined the army at 15, lied about my age, learned to fight, learned to survive. Eventually, I inherited the title when my father drank himself to death. But I remember what it felt like, to be powerless, to be invisible. He looked at her, and for the first time, Clara saw something in his eyes that wasn't cold. Pain. I can't undo what was done to you, he said quietly, but I can give you a chance to rebuild, if you'll take it. Clara didn't know what to say. She nodded, barely. Rowan stood. There's a library downstairs. You're welcome to use it. Mrs. Brennan can show you. Then he left, closing the door softly behind him. Clara sat there for a long time, staring at the space where he'd been. For the first time since she'd arrived, she felt something other than fear. Hope. Fragile. Terrifying. But real. The library became her refuge. It was on the first floor, a huge room lined with shelves that reached the ceiling. There were thousands of books, novels, histories, philosophy, science. More books than Clara had ever seen in her life. She spent hours there, reading, learning, losing herself in worlds that weren't hers. Mrs. Brennan brought her tea and told her about the house, about Northwood, about the people who lived and worked there. His Grace is a good man, she said one afternoon, settling into a chair across from Clara. Hard, yes, but fair. He doesn't suffer fools, and he doesn't tolerate cruelty. The people here respect him. Does he have family? Clara asked. Mrs. Brennan shook her head. Not anymore. He's alone, has been for years. Clara thought about that. About Rowan. Alone in this massive fortress, surrounded by people but connected to no one. It sounded familiar. Masit. Winter deepened. Snow piled against the walls. The wind howled through the valley. But inside Northwood, Clara was warm. She started venturing out of her room more, exploring the house, talking to the staff. Not much, but enough. They were kind to her, curious maybe, but not cruel. She learned their names. Marcus, the steward. Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper. Greta, the cook. Thomas, the groundskeeper. And a dozen others, all of them part of the strange, quiet world Rowan had built. Clara also started eating more. Her stomach adjusted. Her body began to fill out just a little. The bruises faded, the cuts healed, but the scars inside didn't. She still flinched when someone moved too quickly. Still woke up in the middle of the night, heart racing, expecting to find herself back in the attic. Still felt like she didn't deserve any of this. One night she had a nightmare. She was back at the Whitlock estate. Vivian was screaming at her. Edmund was laughing. Louisa and Margot were watching, silent and indifferent. And Clara was small again, powerless, invisible. She woke up gasping, her heart pounding. A knock on the door. Clara? Rowan's voice, low and calm. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her. I'm fine. The door opened. Rowan stood there, still dressed, like he hadn't gone to bed yet. I heard you, he said. Clara's face burned. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. He stepped inside, leaving the door ajar. Nightmares? She nodded. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he crossed the room and sat in the chair by the fire, keeping a careful distance. They'll get better, he said. Not quickly, but they will. How do you know? Because I had them too, for years. Clara looked at him, and for the first time she saw him not as the Duke of Northwood, but as someone who understood. What did you do? She asked. Survived, same as you. He leaned back, his expression distant. Some nights were worse than others, but eventually the good days started to outnumber the bad. Clara pulled her knees to her chest. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Live. Like this. Without fear. Rowan looked at her, and his voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. You don't have to figure it out all at once. Just take it one day at a time. He stayed there until she fell back asleep. Weeks turned into months. Clara grew stronger. She started helping in the library, organizing books, reading to Mrs. Brennan's grandchildren when they visited. She learned to ride a horse. Badly, but she learned. She started writing in a journal Rowan had given her, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. And slowly, carefully, she started to believe that maybe this was real, that maybe she was safe. But then, one morning in early March, everything shifted. Clara was in the library when Marcus found her. His Grace wants to see you, he said, in his study. Clara's stomach dropped. Why? He didn't say. She followed Marcus down the hall to a heavy oak door. He knocked, then opened it. Rowan's study was dark, lined with maps and ledgers. He sat behind a massive desk, papers spread out in front of him. He looked up when Clara entered. Close the door, he said. Clara did, her heart pounding. Rowan stood and came around the desk. He looked. Tense, more than usual. There's something you need to know, he said. Clara's mouth went dry. What? I've been looking into your family's finances, your estate, the circumstances around your father's death. Clara's heart skipped. And? Rowan's jaw tightened. Your mother lied to you. Your father isn't dead. The world tilted. Clara grabbed the edge of the desk to steady herself. What? He's alive. Imprisoned overseas. He was betrayed, set up by someone close to your family. I don't have all the details yet, but I'm working on it. Clara couldn't breathe. How do you know? I have contacts. People who owe me favors. I started digging the moment I brought you here. He paused. I also discovered something else. What? Your family's estate is bankrupt, has been for 2 years. Your mother's been selling off assets, taking loans she can't repay, all to maintain appearances. He pulled out a document and handed it to her. As of last week, I own the deed to the Whitlock estate. Legally, I control everything. Clara stared at the paper, the words blurring. Why? Because I wanted you to have a choice. A choice about what? Rowan's eyes met hers. What happens to them? Clara's hands shook. I don't understand. Your mother, your siblings, they're living in a house I now own, on money I'm providing. If I cut them off, they lose everything. He paused. I'm giving you the power to decide their fate. Clara's legs gave out. She sat down hard in the nearest chair. Her father was alive. Rowan owned her family's estate, and he was giving her the choice. Revenge, justice, mercy. It was hers. She looked up at Rowan, her voice barely a whisper. What do you think I should do? That's not my decision, he said quietly. It's yours. And for the first time in her life, Clara Whitlock held all the power. Clara stared at the document in her hands until the words stopped making sense. Her father was alive. Rowan owned everything, and she could destroy them all with a single word. The room felt too small, too hot. She stood abruptly, the paper falling to the floor. I need to think, she said, her voice shaking. Rowan didn't move. Take all the time you need. Clara walked out. She made it halfway down the hall before her legs gave out. She braced herself against the wall, trying to breathe, but the air wouldn't come. Her chest was tight, her hands numb, her mind spinning so fast she couldn't catch a single thought. Mrs. Brennan found her there. "Oh, child," the housekeeper said softly, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Come on, let's get you somewhere quiet." She guided Clara to a small sitting room and settled her into a chair by the fire. Then she poured a glass of water and pressed it into Clara's hands. "Drink," she ordered. Clara drank. The water was cold, grounding. Slowly, the panic began to recede. "Mrs." Brennan sat across from her, waiting. "He told you?" Clara whispered. "He told me enough." Mrs. Brennan's expression was kind but firm. "And I'll tell you what I told him. This is your decision. Not his, not mine. Yours. I don't know what to do." "Then don't decide yet. Sit with it. Let yourself feel it. Then decide." Clara looked down at her hands. They were shaking. "I thought he was dead. For 3 years I thought he was dead. And now you know he's not." "And now I know my mother lied." Clara's voice broke. "She looked me in the eye and told me he was gone. She let me believe it. She let me grieve." Mrs. Brennan reached over and squeezed her hand. "I won't tell you what to do. But I will tell you this. You've survived too much to let them poison what comes next. Whatever you decide, make sure it's about who you want to be, not who they made you." Clara nodded, even though she didn't know if she understood. She spent the rest of the day in her room, staring out the window at the snow-covered valley. Her mind wouldn't stop racing. Her father was alive, imprisoned, betrayed. By who? Vivian? Someone else? And what did it matter? He'd been gone for 3 years. 3 years while Clara scrubbed floors and starved and disappeared. If he was alive, why hadn't he come back? Why hadn't he sent word? Unless he couldn't. The thought hit her like a fist. What if he'd tried? What if he'd been screaming for help and no one had listened? What if he'd been suffering just like she had? Clara pressed her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. She didn't know what the right answer was. She didn't even know if there was a right answer. All she knew was that for the first time in her life, she had power, and she had no idea what to do with it. That night, Rowan knocked on her door again. Clara was sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, when she heard it. "Come in," she said. He stepped inside, his expression unreadable as always. He didn't sit, just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking uncomfortable. "I shouldn't have dropped that on you," he said. "Not all at once. You thought I deserved to know." "I did, but I could have been gentler about it." Clara almost laughed. "You don't do gentle." "No, I don't." He paused. "But I'm trying." The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. He cared. Not in a soft, comforting way, but in a fierce, protective way that didn't know how to express itself except through action. "What would you do?" she asked. "If you were me?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'd make them face what they did. Not out of cruelty, but because people who hide from consequences never change. And my father? I'd find him, bring him home, no matter what it took." Clara pulled the blanket tighter. "What if he doesn't want to come home? What if he gave up on us?" "Then you'll know, and you can decide what comes next." Rowan crossed the room and sat down across from her. "But you'll never know if you don't try." Clara stared into the fire. "I want to see them." "Your family?" "Yes." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Are you sure?" "No, but I need to." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "I'll arrange it." 3 days later, Clara stood outside the Whitlock estate for the first time in 4 months. It looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The gates were rusted, the stone walls crumbling in places. Snow had drifted against the front steps, and no one had bothered to clear it. The carriage had brought her and Rowan from Northwood that morning. Marcus had wanted to come too, but Rowan had refused. This wasn't a social call. This was something Clara needed to do alone. Well, not alone. Rowan stood beside her, solid and unmoving. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "Yes, I do." She walked up the steps and knocked. No one answered. She knocked again, harder. Finally, the door opened. Edmund stood there, and for a moment he didn't recognize her. Then his eyes widened. "Clara?" She barely recognized him either. He looked thinner, tired. His clothes were rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "What are you doing here, you damn Pete?" he demanded. "I need to speak with Mother. She doesn't want to see you." "I don't care what she wants." Clara's voice was steady, cold. "Let me in." Edmund hesitated, then stepped aside. Clara walked into the front hall. It was freezing. The fires were out. The air smelled like damp and decay. Rowan followed her inside, his presence filling the space. Edmund looked at him, then at Clara. "What's going on?" "Where is she?" Clara asked. "In the drawing room." Clara walked down the hall, her heart pounding. Rowan stayed close, a silent shadow at her back. She pushed open the door to the drawing room. Vivian sat by the window, staring out at the snow. She looked older, harder. Her face was pinched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She didn't turn when Clara entered. "I told Edmund I didn't want to see you," she said. "I know." Clara stepped into the room. "But we're going to talk anyway." Vivian finally turned. Her eyes swept over Clara, taking in the clean dress, the healthy color in her cheeks, the way she stood straighter now. "You look well," Vivian said, her voice dripping with contempt. "I suppose you're happy, living off his charity." "It's not charity." Clara's voice didn't shake. "It's what I deserved all along." Vivian laughed bitterly. "You deserved nothing. You were always a burden, a mistake." "Maybe, but I'm not your burden anymore." Vivian's expression twisted. "What do you want, Clara? Did you come here to gloat?" "No." Clara stepped closer. "I came to tell you that I know the truth." "What truth?" "About Father, about the estate, about everything." Vivian went very still. Clara pulled out the document Rowan had given her and set it on the table between them. "Duke Blackthorne owns this house now," Clara said. "He owns the land, the debts, all of it. And he's given me the authority to decide what happens to you." Vivian's face went white. "That's not possible." "It is, and it's done." Vivian stood, her hands shaking. "You have no right." "I have every right." Clara's voice was sharp now, cutting. "You starved me, beat me, treated me like I was less than human, and now I hold your fate in my hands." Vivian stared at her, and for the first time in Clara's life, she saw fear in her mother's eyes. "What are you going to do?" Vivian whispered. Clara looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw not a monster, but a broken, desperate woman who'd chosen cruelty over compassion because it was easier. "I'm going to give you a choice," Clara said quietly. "You can stay here, but things will change. You'll live modestly. No more pretending, no more lies. You'll work, contribute, and if you can't do that, you'll leave." Vivian's lips trembled. "You can't do this to me." "I can, and I am." Clara turned to Rowan. "The estate will be managed by someone trustworthy, someone who will make sure the staff is paid, the house is maintained, and the family lives within their means." Rowan nodded. "Already arranged." Clara looked back at Vivian. "Edmund will learn to manage the land properly, or he'll lose his place here. Louisa and Margot will be given a chance to build real lives, if they want it." "And me?" Vivian's voice was a broken whisper. "You'll stay, but you'll answer to the people you once ruled over, and you'll learn what it feels like to be powerless." Vivian sank back into her chair, her face crumpling. Clara felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a deep, exhausting sadness. "I could destroy you," Clara said. "I could take everything and leave you with nothing, but I won't, because I'm not you." She turned and walked out. Rowan followed. In the hallway, Clara stopped, her whole body shaking. Rowan put a hand on her shoulder. "You did well." Clara shook her head. "I don't feel like I did." "You showed her mercy. That's more than she deserved." "Maybe, but it's what I needed." They walked back to the carriage in silence. That night, back at Northwood, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her father, about the fact that he was out there somewhere, trapped, maybe suffering. She had to find him. She had to bring him home. but she had no idea how. The next morning, she went to Rowan's study. He was already there, working through a stack of papers. "I need your help," Clara said without preamble. Rowan looked up. "With what?" "Finding my father." He set down his pen. "I'm already working on it." I want to go with you." Rowan's expression hardened. "No." "Why not?" "Because it's dangerous. The people who betrayed your father aren't going to just hand him over. This isn't a negotiation. It's a fight." "Then I'll fight." "Clara, he's my father." Her voice broke. "I lost him once. I'm not losing him again." Rowan stood, his jaw tight. "You don't know what you're asking." "Then tell me." He was silent for a long moment, then, "Your father is being held in a prison in Haldren. It's a border town, lawless, corrupt, controlled by people who don't answer to any government. Getting him out will require money, connections, and probably violence. So? So it's not a place for you." Clara stepped closer. "I survived 14 years with Vivian. I think I can handle a corrupt border town." Rowan stared at her. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Fine, but you do exactly what I say. No arguments, no hesitation. Understood?" "Understood." "We leave in 3 days." The journey to Haldren took a week. They traveled by carriage at first, then by horseback when the roads became too rough. The landscape grew harsher, rocky hills, dense forests, frozen rivers. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Rowan had brought 2 of his men, Marcus and a younger man named Gregor, who was built like a bear and carried a sword that looked like it could cleave a man in half. They didn't talk much. Rowan was focused, his mind clearly on what lay ahead. Clara tried to prepare herself, but she had no idea what to expect. Haldren appeared on the 7th day. It was a sprawling, ugly town built against the side of a mountain. Wooden buildings leaned against each other like drunks. Smoke poured from chimneys. The streets were mud and ice, and the people who walked them looked hard, mean, and desperate. "Stay close," Rowan said as they rode through the gates. Clara nodded, her hand tight on the reins. They stopped at an inn, a squat, dark building that smelled like stale beer and unwashed bodies. Rowan paid for rooms, and they gathered in his to plan. "The prison is on the east side of town," Rowan said, unfolding a map. "It's not official, more like a holding pen run by a man named Cade. He's a smuggler, a thief, and a killer. He holds people for ransom or sells them to whoever pays." "How do we get in?" Clara asked. "We don't. Not at first. We negotiate." "And if he won't negotiate?" Rowan's expression was grim. "Then we take your father by force." Clara swallowed. "When do we start?" "Tonight." Cade's compound was surrounded by high walls and armed guards. Rowan approached alone, his hands visible, while Clara, Marcus, and Gregor waited in the shadows nearby. A guard stopped him at the gate. "State your business." "I'm here to see Cade. I have a proposal." The guard looked him over, then nodded. "Wait here." 10 minutes later, the gate opened. Rowan disappeared inside. Clara's heart pounded. She wanted to follow, to see what was happening, but Rowan had been clear. She stayed hidden unless things went wrong. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then a shout, the sound of breaking glass. "Move!" Marcus hissed. They ran toward the gate. Inside, chaos. Rowan was fighting 3 men at once, his fists a blur. Blood streaked his face, but he didn't stop. Clara saw her father. He was chained to a post in the corner of the courtyard, thin and battered, but alive. "Father!" she screamed. He looked up, his eyes widening in shock. "Clara!" She ran toward him, but a guard grabbed her arm. She twisted, slammed her elbow into his face, and kept running. Gregor cut down 2 men who tried to stop her. Marcus fought off a third. Clara reached her father and started working on the chains. "Clara, what are you doing here?" he gasped. "Getting you out." The chains broke. Her father stumbled, and Clara caught him. "We need to go," she said. "Now." Rowan appeared beside them, breathing hard. "Move!" They ran. Behind them, Cade's men shouted and gave chase. They made it to the horses, barely. Rowan hauled Clara's father up onto one, then swung up behind him. "Ride!" he shouted. They rode hard through the streets of Haldren, arrows whistling past their heads. They didn't stop until they were miles outside the town, the mountain fading into the distance behind them. Clara's father collapsed against the horse's neck, gasping. "You came for me," he whispered. Clara looked at him, tears streaming down her face. "Of course I did," she said. "You're my father." And for the first time in 3 years, she saw him smile. They rode through the night without stopping. Clara's father, James Whitlock, clung to the saddle in front of Rowan, barely conscious. His breathing was ragged, his body shaking with fever. Every few miles he'd start to slip, and Rowan would catch him, adjusting his grip without slowing the horse. Clara rode beside them, her eyes locked on her father's pale face. He looked nothing like she remembered. He'd been strong once, broad-shouldered and confident. Now he was gaunt, his skin stretched over bone, his hair gray and matted with dirt. But he was alive. That was all that mattered. Behind them, Marcus and Gregor kept watch, scanning the darkness for signs of pursuit. Cade's men wouldn't give up easily. Not after losing a prisoner, and not after the damage Rowan had done to 3 of them. Dawn broke cold and gray as they finally stopped at an abandoned shepherd's hut halfway up a hillside. It was barely standing, roof half collapsed, walls crumbling, but it had 4 walls and shelter from the wind. Rowan dismounted and carefully lifted James down. The older man's legs buckled immediately. "I've got you," Rowan said, supporting his weight. Clara jumped down and rushed over. He's alive, but he needs rest, and a doctor." "The nearest town with a decent physician is 2 days west," Marcus said, tying off the horses. "But if Cade's men are tracking us—" "They are," Rowan said flatly, "which means we can't stay here long." Gregor built a small fire while Clara helped settle her father on a bedroll near the flames. She wrapped him in every blanket they had, but he still shivered violently. His eyes opened, unfocused and glassy with fever. "Clara?" His voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here, Father." His hand found hers, skeletal fingers gripping tight. "You shouldn't have come. Too dangerous." "I wasn't leaving you there." A weak smile. "You look like your mother. The good parts." Clara's throat tightened. "Rest. Save your strength." His eyes closed again. Rowan crouched beside her, his expression grim. "He's in bad shape. Infection, malnutrition, probably broken ribs that healed wrong. If we don't get him to a doctor soon—" "Then we get him to a doctor," Clara said. "Whatever it takes." Rowan studied her face, then nodded. "We leave at first light. Marcus will scout ahead. If the route's clear, we push hard for Greymont. There's a physician there, I trust. And if the route isn't clear, then we fight our way through." Clara looked at her father's sleeping form. 3 years. 3 years he'd been trapped in that hellhole while Vivian told everyone he was dead. While she played the grieving widow and spent money they didn't have. "Who did this to him?" Clara asked quietly. Rowan hesitated. "Tell me." He sat back on his heels. "From what I've pieced together, your mother's cousin, a man named Roland Vess. He and your father had a business partnership, timber contracts, shipping routes. Your father discovered Roland was embezzling, planned to expose him. So Roland had him arrested? Worse, he framed your father for treason, bribed officials to have him shipped to Haldren, then paid Cade to keep him locked up indefinitely." Rowan's jaw tightened, and he convinced your mother to go along with it. Clara's blood went cold. Vivian knew? She knew he wasn't dead, whether she knew the rest. He shrugged. She chose not to ask questions. Roland promised to keep the estate afloat financially if she played along. But he didn't. No, he bled the estate dry and disappeared 6 months ago with everything of value. Clara stared into the fire, her hands shaking. She chose this. She chose him over father, over all of us. People make terrible choices when they're desperate. That's not an excuse. No, Rowan agreed quietly. It's not. Clara looked at her father again. He looked so small, so broken. But he was alive, and she was going to make sure he stayed that way. They left before dawn. James was barely able to sit upright in the saddle. Clara rode with him this time, keeping him steady while Rowan led the way. Marcus scouted ahead on foot, moving through the trees like a ghost. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed into the mountains. The path was narrow, hemmed in by sheer cliffs on one side and a steep drop on the other. The horses picked their way carefully over ice-slicked rocks. They'd been riding for maybe 3 hours when Marcus came running back, his face urgent. Riders? 6 of them, coming up fast from the south. Rowan cursed. Cade's men? Likely, they're armed and moving with purpose. How far? 20 minutes, maybe less. Rowan looked around, assessing the landscape. There was nowhere to hide. The path was too exposed, too narrow. We can't outrun them, Gregor said. Not with Whitlock in this condition. Rowan's expression hardened. Then we make a stand. Here? Clara looked at the narrow path, the cliff walls. We'll be trapped. Exactly, which means they can only come at us from one direction. Rowan dismounted and started pulling weapons from the saddlebags. Swords, knives, a crossbow. Clara, take your father up the path another 100 yards. Find cover. Stay low. If things go wrong, you run. Understand? I'm not leaving you. You are if I tell you to. Rowan, this isn't a debate. His eyes were hard. Your father needs you alive, so you're going to take him and hide. And if we don't come back, you ride for Greymont and you don't look back. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but she looked at her father, slumped and barely conscious, and knew Rowan was right. Fine, she said. But you come back. Something flickered in Rowan's eyes. I'll do my best. Clara helped her father onto the horse and led it up the path. Behind them, she heard Rowan and the others taking positions. She found a small alcove in the rock face about 100 yards up. Not much, but enough to hide the horse and provide some cover. She helped her father down and settled him against the stone. What's happening? He mumbled. Nothing. We're just resting. His hand found hers again. You're lying. Yes. He managed a weak smile. Always were a terrible liar. Clara gripped his hand tighter and peered around the edge of the alcove. She could see Rowan and the others below. 3 men against 6. The odds weren't good. Then she heard the sound of hooves. 6 riders came around the bend, heavily armed. They pulled up short when they saw Rowan blocking the path. The lead rider, a scarred man with a missing eye, grinned. Well, well, the Duke of Northwood. Cade sends his regards. Turn around, Rowan said calmly. Walk away, and we'll forget this happened. The man laughed. You killed 3 of our brothers, stole our prisoner. You really think we're just going to walk away? I'm giving you the chance. Cade's offering 100 gold pieces for the old man, and another 100 for your head. The man drew his sword. I'll take both. Last warning. Go to hell. The riders charged. Clara watched in horror as chaos erupted below. Rowan moved like something inhuman, fast, brutal, efficient. His sword flashed in the morning light, and the first rider went down, blood spraying across the snow. Marcus fought with 2 knives dancing between attacks. Gregor was a mountain, using his size and strength to batter men off their horses. But 6 against 3 was still 6 against 3. One of Cade's men got past Gregor and started up the path toward Clara's hiding spot. She froze. The man saw her and grinned. There you are. He dismounted and started walking toward her, sword drawn. Clara looked around frantically. No weapon, no escape route, just her unconscious father, and a man twice her size coming to kill them both. Her hand closed around a rock. It wasn't much, but it was something. The man got closer. Come on, girl. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Clara waited until he was 5 feet away. Then she threw the rock as hard as she could. It hit him square in the face. He stumbled back, cursing, blood streaming from his nose. Clara grabbed a larger rock, this one the size of her fist, and swung it like a club as he lunged forward. The impact jarred her arm, but the man went down. She didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. She grabbed another rock and brought it down on his head. Once. Twice. He stopped moving. Clara stood there, breathing hard, her hands covered in blood. She'd never hurt anyone before. Never even thought about it, but looking at the unconscious man at her feet, she felt nothing. No guilt. No horror. Just the cold, clear knowledge that she would do whatever it took to survive. She heard a shout from below and looked down. The fight was over. 4 of Cade's men lay dead or dying. The other 2 had fled. Rowan was bleeding from a cut on his shoulder, but he was standing. Marcus was limping. Gregor had a gash across his forehead, but looked otherwise intact. Rowan saw her and started up the path, moving fast despite his injury. He took in the scene, the unconscious man, the blood on Clara's hands, the look on her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Clara shook her head. Rowan looked at the man on the ground, then back at Clara. "You did what you had to do." "I know." He pulled her into a brief, hard embrace. "We need to move. Now." They rode for 2 more days without rest. James's fever worsened. He slipped in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently. Clara tried to keep him warm, tried to get him to drink water, but it wasn't enough. They needed a doctor. Greymont appeared on the 3rd day like a miracle. It was a small town built into the side of a valley, stone buildings clustered around a central square. Smoke rose from chimneys. People moved through the streets, going about their lives. Normal. Safe. Rowan led them straight to a modest house on the edge of town and pounded on the door. A woman answered, middle-aged, gray-haired, with sharp eyes that took in James's condition immediately. "Inside, fight," she said without preamble. "Get him to the back room." They carried James in and laid him on a narrow bed. The woman, Dr. Hale's wife, Clara learned later, immediately started examining him, her hands quick and efficient. Infection, broken ribs, malnutrition. How long has he been like this? 3 years, Clara said. The woman's eyebrows rose, but she didn't ask questions. "I'll do what I can. But he's in bad shape." "Will he live? If he fights? And if you let me work?" Rowan pulled Clara out of the room. "She's the best. If anyone can save him, she can." Clara nodded, but she couldn't stop shaking. They'd made it. They'd gotten him out. They'd survived. But it still might not be enough. James was unconscious for 3 days. Clara stayed by his bedside the entire time, refusing to eat, refusing to sleep. Rowan tried to pull her away, but she wouldn't budge. "He's going to wake up," she said stubbornly, "and I'm going to be here when he does." On the 4th day, his eyes opened. Clara gasped. "Father?" He blinked slowly, his gaze focusing on her face. "Clara, I'm here. I thought I dreamed you." His voice was rough, but stronger than before. "Thought I dreamed all of it. It wasn't a dream. You're safe now." Tears slid down his weathered face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you with her." Clara gripped his hand. "It's not your fault. I should have fought harder, should have found a way. You're here now, that's what matters." He closed his eyes, exhausted. "Tell me what happened. Tell me everything." So Clara did. She told him about Vivian's lies, about the years of abuse, about Rowan pulling her out of that hell, about discovering the truth, about the choice she'd made to show mercy instead of revenge. When she finished, James was quiet for a long time. "You're stronger than I ever was," he said finally. "I learned from you." "No." He shook his head. "You learned despite me." Clara didn't know what to say to that. James looked toward the door where Rowan stood in the hallway, keeping watch. "Is that him? The Duke?" "Yes. I owe him my life. We both do." James studied Rowan for a moment, then looked back at Clara. His eyes were knowing. "You care for him." Clara's face flushed. "He's been kind to me. It's more than that. Father, it's all right. I can see it. The way you look at him, the way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching." James squeezed her hand. "He's a good man. Better than most." Clara didn't know what to say. She hadn't let herself think about it, hadn't let herself feel it, but her father was right. Somewhere between being saved and saving him, something had shifted. She cared about Rowan. More than she should. More than was safe. Sit. 2 weeks later, James was strong enough to travel. They returned to Northwood together, Clara, James, and Rowan. The estate felt different now. Warmer. Like it might actually be a home. Mrs. Brennan fussed over James, feeding him soup and forcing him to rest. Marcus arranged for proper doctors to continue his care. Gregor stood guard, making sure no one from Haldren came looking for revenge. And Clara finally let herself breathe. One evening, she found Rowan in the library, staring out the window at the snow-covered valley. "Thank you," she said. He turned. "For what?" "For everything. For seeing me when no one else did. For saving me. For helping me save him." Rowan was quiet for a moment. "You saved yourself, Clara. I just gave you the space to do it." "That's not true." "It is." He crossed the room to stand in front of her. "You're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived things that would have broken most people, and instead of letting it destroy you, you chose to be better." Clara's eyes stung. "I don't feel strong." "You see, that's because you're still healing, but you will." She looked up at him, at the hard lines of his face, the gray eyes that saw too much. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's up to you." "I don't want to leave." Something shifted in his expression. "Then don't. Rowan, stay, here, at Northwood, for as long as you want, you and your father both." Clara's heart was pounding. "Why?" He hesitated, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw uncertainty in his eyes. "Because I don't want you to go," he said quietly. The words hung between them. Clara took a step closer. "I don't want to go either." Rowan reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch gentle. "Then stay." "Okay?" He smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. And for the first time in her life, Clara felt like she'd found somewhere she belonged. That night, Clara sat with her father in his room. He looked better. The color was returning to his face, the strength to his voice. "I spoke with the Duke today," he said. "About what?" "About you, about the estate, about the future." James leaned back against the pillows. "He told me what you did, how you handled your mother, the choice you made." Clara looked down. "I did what I thought was right." "You did more than that. You showed wisdom, compassion, strength." He reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you." The words broke something inside her. Tears spilled down her face before she could stop them. "I thought I'd never hear you say that," she whispered. "I should have said it years ago." They sat there in silence, holding hands, until the fire burned low. Spring came slowly to Northwood. The snow melted. Green crept back into the valley. Birds returned. And Clara began to believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was behind her. She helped Mrs. Brennan in the kitchens, read in the library, rode horses with Gregor teaching her proper form, spent evenings talking with her father about everything they'd missed. And she spent time with Rowan, not doing anything special, just existing in the same space, reading while he worked, walking through the estate, talking about small things and big things and everything in between. It was easy, comfortable, and terrifying, because Clara was falling for him and she had no idea what to do about it. One afternoon, they were walking through the gardens when Rowan stopped. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. Clara's stomach dropped. "What?" "Roland Vess, the man who betrayed your father. I found him." Clara went very still. "Where?" "Hiding in a port town 3 days south. He's broke, desperate, trying to book passage overseas." "What are you going to do?" Rowan looked at her. "That depends on you." "Why me?" "Because he's the reason your father suffered, the reason your family fell apart. You have more right to decide his fate than anyone." Clara thought about it, about Roland Vess, who'd stolen everything and left her father to rot, who'd convinced Vivian to lie, who'd destroyed their lives for money. She should hate him, should want revenge, but all she felt was tired. "Let him go," she said. Rowan's eyebrows rose. "Are you sure? He's already lost everything. His money's gone, his reputation's ruined, and he has to live with what he did." Clara looked up at Rowan. "That's punishment enough." Rowan studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. Besides," Clara added, "I'm done letting the past control my future." A slow smile spread across Rowan's face. So am I. And standing there in the garden, with spring beginning to bloom around them, Clara finally understood what it meant to be free. Summer arrived at Northwood like a promise kept. The valley turned green and gold. Wildflowers bloomed in meadows Clara hadn't known existed. The air lost its bite, turning warm and sweet with the smell of pine and earth. Even the fortress-like estate seemed softer somehow, its dark stone walls catching the sunlight in ways that made them look less like a prison and more like protection. Clara stood at her bedroom window one morning, watching the sun rise over the mountains, and realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd been afraid. Not the deep, bone-crushing fear that had followed her every moment at the Whitlock estate. Not the terror of wondering if she'd survive another day. Not the suffocating certainty that she was worthless. That girl was gone. In her place was someone Clara was still learning to recognize. Someone who ate 3 meals a day without guilt. Someone who slept through the night. Someone who laughed, actually laughed, when Gregor told terrible jokes, or when Mrs. Brennan scolded Marcus for tracking mud through the kitchen. Someone who was learning what it meant to live instead of just survive. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she called. Her father entered, moving slower than he used to but steadier every day. The doctor said he'd never fully recover from what had been done to him. The broken ribs had healed wrong. His lungs were damaged from years in the damp prison, but he was alive. And that was more than either of them had dared hope for 6 months ago. "You're up early," he said. "Couldn't sleep." "Nightmares?" "No, just thinking." James crossed the room to stand beside her at the window. For a moment, they both just looked out at the valley. "It's beautiful here, Key," he said quietly. "It is." "You're happy." It wasn't a question, but Clara answered anyway. "Yes, I think I am." James smiled. "Good. You deserve it." Clara looked at him, really looked at him. He'd aged in the years they'd been apart. His hair was completely gray now, his face lined with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes were clear, present. "I got a letter yesterday," he said, "from Vivian." Clara's stomach tightened. What did she want? To apologize, to explain, to beg me to come back. He pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it to Clara. "I thought you should see it." Clara unfolded the paper. The handwriting was Vivian's, elegant, precise, utterly controlled even when begging. "James, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I was desperate. Roland promised he would save the estate, save our name, save everything we'd built. I didn't know what he would do to you. I swear I didn't know. Please come home. Please give me another chance. I'll do anything." Clara read it twice, then folded it and handed it back. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "Nothing." "Nothing?" James looked out the window again. She made her choice. She chose appearances over truth, status over love, and she has to live with that. He paused. "I loved her once, or I thought I did, but that woman is gone, and I'm not going back to try and find her." "Where will you go?" He looked at her, surprised. "I'm staying here, if Rowan will have me." "He will." "And you?" Clara swallowed. "I don't know yet." James put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to decide today. But Clara, don't let fear make the choice for you. You've spent too long letting fear control your life." He left her alone with that thought. Clara stood at the window for a long time after he'd gone, turning his words over in her mind. Fear had controlled her for so long that she barely knew how to function without it. It had been her compass, her guide, the thing that kept her alive when nothing else could. But fear was also a cage, and she'd spent too long locked up. Later that morning, Clara found Rowan in the stables. He was brushing down his horse, a massive black stallion named Shadow, with steady, methodical strokes. He didn't hear her approach until she was a few feet away. "Morning," she said. He looked up, a small smile crossing his face. "Morning. You're up early." "So are you." "Couldn't sleep." "Me neither." He went back to brushing the horse. Clara leaned against the stable door, watching him work. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, efficient, focused, completely present in the moment. My father got a letter from Vivian, Clara said. Rowan's hand paused mid-stroke. And? She wants him to come back, says she's sorry, says she didn't know what Roland would do. Do you believe her? Clara thought about it. I think she believes she didn't have a choice. I think she convinced herself that what she was doing was necessary, but that doesn't make it right. No, it doesn't. Rowan set down the brush and turned to face her fully. What did your father say? He's staying here, if that's all right with you. Of course it is. This is his home now, yours too. There it was again, that word. Home. Clara looked down at her hands. I've been thinking about what comes next. And? I want to go back to the Whitlock estate. One more time. Rowan's expression darkened. Why? Because I need to see it. I need to face them, not as a victim, but as who I am now. She looked up at him. I need to prove to myself that they don't have power over me anymore. Rowan was quiet for a long moment, then, I'll come with you. You don't have to. I know, but I will anyway. Clara felt something warm spread through her chest. Thank you. You don't need to thank me for this, not for anything. He stepped closer. You've thanked me 100 times for things you never should have had to be grateful for in the first place. Food, safety, basic human decency. Those aren't gifts, Clara. They're rights. And the fact that you had to fight for them, that you still feel like you owe me for them, tells me everything I need to know about what was done to you. Clara's eyes stung. I still don't know how to accept it. Any of it. Sometimes I wake up, and I'm still surprised the bed is soft. That there's food. That no one's going to hit me. That will fade, eventually. How do you know? Because it did for me. Rowan's jaw tightened. It took years, but it did. They stood there in the quiet stable, the only sound the soft shuffle of horses and the rustle of hay. When do we leave? Clara asked finally. Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow? Rowan nodded. Tomorrow. Iprad. They left for the Whitlock estate at dawn. The journey felt different this time. Clara wasn't running, wasn't hiding. She was choosing to go back, and that made all the difference. Her father rode with them, silent and tense. He hadn't seen Vivian since before his imprisonment. Clara wondered what he was thinking, what he was feeling, but she didn't ask. Some things needed to be held privately. The landscape changed as they traveled south. The wild, untamed beauty of Northwood gave way to gentler hills, cultivated fields, the trappings of civilization. It should have felt like coming home. Instead, it felt like visiting a graveyard. The estate appeared in the late afternoon, and Clara's first thought was how small it looked. She'd spent her entire life believing the Whitlock estate was enormous, important, a place that mattered. But compared to Northwood, compared to the world she'd seen in the past 6 months, it was tiny, insignificant. The gates hung crooked on their hinges. Weeds had taken over the gardens. Paint peeled from the window frames. One of the upper windows was broken, covered with a board. The fountain in the courtyard had gone dry, filled now with dead leaves and debris. It looked like what it was, a dying monument to a family that had built itself on lies. Rowan had sent word ahead that they were coming. When they arrived, Edmund was waiting at the door. He looked different, thinner, older. The arrogance was gone from his face, replaced by something that might have been humility, or maybe just exhaustion. Clara, he said quietly. Father. James didn't respond, just walked past him into the house without a word. Clara paused. Where's Mother? In the drawing room. Louisa and Margot are with her. Edmund shifted uncomfortably. She's been preparing all day, cleaning, making herself presentable. He stopped. She wants him back. I know. Is he going to stay? Clara looked at her brother, really looked at him. He'd been 19 when she left, cruel, arrogant, completely convinced of his own superiority. Now he looked lost, like a child playing at being an adult and failing. No, Clara said. He's not. Edmund's face fell. I see. What have you been doing since I left? He laughed bitterly. trying to keep this place from falling apart, trying to manage the land, trying to understand the books Father kept, the contracts, the debts. I have no idea what I'm doing, Clara. I thought I did. Mother always said I was so clever, so capable, but I'm not. I'm just... He stopped, shaking his head. I'm just pretending. Clara felt something unexpected. Not quite pity, not quite sympathy, but something close. Then stop pretending, she said. Ask for help, learn, do the actual work instead of just play acting at it. From who? Who would help me? I would. Father would. If you prove you're serious. Edmund stared at her. Why would you help me? After everything I did to you? Because someone has to break the cycle, and I'd rather it be us than wait for the next generation to suffer for our mistakes. She moved past him toward the door. But Edmund, if you want help, you have to actually change. Not just say you will. Actually do it. She didn't wait for his response. Inside, the house was just as shabby as the exterior. Furniture was missing, sold off, probably. The rugs were worn thin. The paintings were gone from the walls, leaving pale rectangles where they'd hung for years. Everything smelled musty, like the house had been closed up and forgotten. Clara followed the sound of voices to the drawing room. Vivienne sat in her usual chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap, her back straight. She wore a dress Clara recognized, deep burgundy silk, one of her favorites. But it hung on her now. She'd lost weight. Her face was thinner, harder, the beauty she'd been so proud of fading into something brittle and desperate. Louisa and Margot sat together on the sofa, both looking nervous. They'd changed too. Louisa looked less soft, more serious. Margot had grown. She was nearly 15 now, no longer the quiet child Clara remembered. James stood by the fireplace, his expression unreadable. Vivienne looked up when Clara entered, and for a moment something flickered in her eyes. Hope. Maybe. Or fear. James, she said, standing. Her voice trembled. You came. I came to tell you in person that I'm not coming back, James said flatly. The words landed like a physical blow. Vivienne actually staggered, catching herself on the arm of the chair. Please, she whispered. I made a mistake. I was desperate. You chose this. His voice was hard, colder than Clara had ever heard it. You chose to believe Roland over me. You chose to let our daughter suffer. You chose appearances over truth. And now you get to live with those choices. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. James's jaw tightened. I spent 3 years in a cell smaller than your closet, Vivienne. 3 years breathing air so damp it rotted my lungs. 3 years eating scraps and wondering if I'd die before anyone realized I was still alive. And you... His voice broke. You put on your mourning dress for a week and moved on. Vivienne was crying now, tears streaming down her face. I thought he would help us. I thought... You thought about yourself. About the estate. About maintaining appearances. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about Clara. James turned away from her, his hands shaking. I can't forgive that. I won't. Clara watched her mother crumble. Part of her, a small, vicious part, felt satisfaction, but mostly she just felt tired. What about us? Louisa asked quietly. What happens to us? James looked at his other daughters. His expression softened slightly. That depends on you. What do you mean? You have a choice. You can stay here and help Edmund try to salvage what's left of this place. Or you can come with us to Northwood. There's room, there's work, and there's a chance to be better than what you were raised to be. Louisa and Margot looked at each other. Clara saw the entire conversation happen in that glance. The fear, the uncertainty, the desperate need to escape, but also the guilt of leaving. We'll stay, Louisa said finally. We'll help Edmund. We'll try to fix things. James nodded. That's brave. Good. He turned to Edmund, who'd appeared in the doorway. The estate is yours now, officially. I'm transferring the deed, the title, all of it. You want to rebuild this family? Prove it. Do better than I did. Do better than she did. He gestured to Vivienne. And you're going to help him, not by controlling him, not by scheming, by actually working. by earning back even a fraction of what you destroyed. Vivian looked up, her face blotchy with tears. How? That's for you to figure out. James's voice was final. But if you contact me again, if you write, if you try to visit, if you send messages through Edmund or the girls, I will cut off all support. The estate will collapse, and you'll have nothing. Do you understand? Vivian nodded, unable to speak. James looked at Clara. Are you ready to go? Clara realized everyone was looking at her, waiting for her to say something, to scream, to cry, to rage at the woman who'd broken her. But she didn't feel rage anymore, just exhaustion, and a strange, distant sadness for what could have been. I have something to say, Clara said quietly. The room went silent. Clara stepped closer to Vivian, who flinched like she expected to be hit. I'm sorry, Vivian whispered, for everything. I know you'll never forgive me, but I'm so sorry. I know you are, Clara said. But sorry doesn't fix what you broke. It doesn't give me back the years you stole. It doesn't erase the scars. Then what can I do? Clara took a breath. Be better. For Edmund. For Louisa and Margot. For yourself. Learn what you should have learned a long time ago, that people matter more than appearances, that love matters more than status, that who you are matters more than what people think you are. She paused, making sure Vivian was actually listening. And leave me alone. I don't want your apologies. I don't want your excuses. I don't want letters or visits or attempts at reconciliation. I want you to stay out of my life and let me build something that isn't poisoned by what you did. Vivian's face crumpled completely. She sank back into the chair, sobbing. Clara felt nothing, no satisfaction, no vindication, just the quiet certainty that this chapter was finally closing. She turned to her sisters. If you need help, real help, not money or favors, but advice or support, you can write to me, but only if you're serious about changing things here. Louisa nodded, her eyes wet. Thank you. Margot stood and crossed the room. For a moment, Clara thought she might hug her. Instead, she stopped a few feet away. I'm sorry I didn't help you, Margot said quietly. When we were kids. I'm sorry I just watched. Clara looked at her youngest sister, no longer the timid child she remembered, but not quite an adult yet either. Just someone caught in between trying to figure out who she wanted to be. Then don't watch anymore, Clara said. Help. Do something. Be better. Margot nodded. Clara turned and walked out of the drawing room, her father and Rowan following. In the hallway, Edmund stopped them. Clara, wait. She turned. Edmund looked at her, and for the first time in her life, she saw actual remorse in his eyes. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. I don't deserve it, but I want you to know I'm going to try, to be better, to do better. I don't know if I can fix this place, but I'm going to try. Clara studied him. Then actually do it. Don't just talk about it. I will. He paused. And Clara, I'm sorry for all of it, for every cruel thing I said, for every time I looked away when Mother... His voice broke. I'm sorry. Clara nodded. Prove it. Not to me. To yourself. Then she walked out. Outside, Rowan was waiting by the carriage. The horses were already hitched, ready to leave. How do you feel? He asked as Clara approached. Clara thought about it. She looked back at the estate, the crumbling walls, the dying gardens, the house full of broken people trying to pretend they weren't broken. Free, she said finally. Rowan smiled. Good. They climbed into the carriage. James settled across from them, his face exhausted but peaceful. As the carriage pulled away, Clara looked back at the estate one last time. She'd been raised in that house, starved in that house, beaten in that house, broken in that house. But she'd also left that house, and she was never going back. The return journey to Northwood took 3 days. They didn't rush. Stopped at inns, ate real meals, talked about everything and nothing. On the second night, Clara found herself unable to sleep. She went downstairs to the common room of the inn and sat by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, staring into the flames. Footsteps on the stairs. Rowan appeared, still dressed, like he'd been waiting for her to come down. Can't sleep? He asked. Too much thinking. He sat down across from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. Somewhere upstairs, someone was snoring. "You were brave today," Rowan said finally. "I didn't feel brave." "That's what makes it brave." Clara looked at him. At the hard planes of his face, the gray eyes that had seen too much but still looked at her with something gentle. "I need to tell you something," she said. "All right." She took a breath. "When you first brought me to Northwood, I didn't trust you. I thought it was a trick, that you'd hurt me or use me or throw me away when you got bored. I know. But you didn't. You gave me space, time, safety. You asked nothing from me except to heal." Her voice caught. "And I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do. Because you saved my life, not just from Vivian, from myself, from believing I was worthless." She wiped at her eyes. "You taught me that I could be more than what was done to me, that I deserved more." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "Clara, I need to tell you something too." Her heart skipped. "What?" "When I saw you that night at dinner, something in me recognized something in you. Pain, survival, the kind of scars that don't show on the outside." He paused. "I told myself I was helping you because it was the right thing to do. And it was. But that's not the only reason." "What's the other reason?" He met her eyes. "Because from the moment I met you, I couldn't stop thinking about you, about making sure you were safe, about seeing you smile, about—" He stopped, then started again. "I'm not good at this. I've never been good at this. But I care about you, Clara. More than I should. More than I plan to." Clara's breath caught. "And I know you're still healing," Rowan continued. "I know you need time. I know I'm probably the last person who should be saying any of this. But I had to tell you. Because if I didn't, I'd spend the rest of my life regretting it." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Then she stood, crossed the space between them, and kissed him. It was clumsy and uncertain and perfect. When she pulled back, Rowan was staring at her like she'd just rewritten the world. "I care about you too," Clara whispered. "I think I have for a while. I was just too scared to admit it. And now? Now I'm done being scared." Rowan smiled, a real, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. Then he kissed her again, slow and careful and full of promise. They stayed there by the fire until it burned down to embers, wrapped in each other, finally letting themselves be vulnerable. They returned to Northwood 2 days later as the sun was setting. The estate looked different in the golden light, less like a fortress and more like a home. Smoke rose from the chimneys, lanterns glowed in the windows, and as the carriage pulled through the gates, Clara felt something she'd never felt before: belonging. Mrs. Brennan met them at the door, fussing over James and ushering him inside to rest. Marcus took the horses. Gregor appeared to help with the luggage, grinning when he saw them. Clara stood in the courtyard, looking up at the building that had given her everything: safety, healing, a future. Rowan came to stand beside her. "Welcome home," he said quietly. Clara took his hand. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me, for choosing me, for giving me a reason to believe in tomorrow." He squeezed her hand. "You did that yourself. I just gave you the space to do it." They stood there as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And Clara knew, with absolute certainty, that she'd found what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not just safety, not just love. Home. Hot. The next 6 months passed in a blur of quiet happiness. Clara helped Mrs. Brennan manage the household. She learned about the estate's operations from Marcus. She rode horses with Gregor, who turned out to be an excellent teacher once you got past his terrible jokes. She spent evenings with her father, talking about everything they'd missed, slowly rebuilding the relationship that had been stolen from them. And she spent time with Rowan, not doing anything special, just existing in the same space, reading while he worked, walking through the estate, talking about small things and big things and everything in between. It was easy, comfortable, and terrifying. because Clara was falling in love with him, and she had no idea what to do about it. One evening in late autumn, Rowan found her in the library. "I have something to ask you," he said. Clara looked up from her book. "What?" He looked nervous. Actually nervous. Clara had never seen him nervous. "Marry me," he said. Clara's heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me. Not because you owe me, not because you think you should, but because I love you. Because I want to spend the rest of my life with you, because—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "Because I can't imagine a future without you in it." Clara stared at him, unable to form words. "You don't have to answer now," Rowan said quickly. "Take your time. Think about it. I just needed you to know—" "Yes." He stopped mid-sentence. "What?" "Yes, I'll marry you. Are you sure?" Clara stood and crossed the room to him. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Rowan pulled her into his arms, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "I love you too." And standing there in the library, surrounded by books and firelight and the quiet certainty of home, Clara finally let herself believe it. They were married in the Northwood Chapel 6 weeks later. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends. James walked Clara down the aisle, his eyes bright with tears. Mrs. Brennan dabbed at her face with a handkerchief. Marcus and Gregor stood as witnesses, both looking uncomfortable in formal clothes, but pleased nonetheless. Clara wore a simple dress of pale blue that Mrs. Brennan had helped her choose, her hair loose around her shoulders. Rowan wore black, as always, but he smiled when he saw her, that rare, genuine smile that she'd worked so hard to earn. They spoke their vows quietly, just to each other, promising loyalty and honesty, and something neither of them quite knew how to name, but both of them understood. Love. Hard-won and honest and real. When it was over, Rowan kissed her gently, and the small crowd erupted in applause. That night, there was a feast in the great hall. Clara sat beside Rowan at the head table, watching the celebration unfold around them. Her father was laughing with Marcus about something. Mrs. Brennan was dancing with Gregor, who looked terrified. Even the servants were celebrating, their faces bright with joy. "You look happy," Rowan said. Clara turned to him. "I am." "Good." He took her hand. "You deserve to be." "So do you." He smiled. "I think we both got lucky. I think we both fought for this." "True." He leaned closer. "Are you ready for what comes next?" "What comes next?" "The rest of our lives." Looked around the hall, at the people who'd become her family, at the home she'd found, at the future she'd built from the ashes of her past. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." Years passed. Clara and Rowan built a life together at Northwood. It wasn't always easy. There were hard winters and failed harvests. There were arguments and misunderstandings and moments when the past crept back in uninvited. But they faced it together. They had children, 3 of them, 2 girls and a boy. Clara taught them to read, to think, to question. She taught them that kindness was strength, not weakness, that survival was only the beginning, and what came after was a choice. She taught them to be better. James lived with them until he died peacefully in his sleep at 73. He spent his final years reading, gardening, and playing with his grandchildren. He never contacted Vivian again, but he seemed at peace. Letters came occasionally from the Whitlock estate. Edmund had managed to stabilize things, though just barely. Louisa had married a local farmer and seemed content. Margot had gone to university, the first woman in the family to do so, and was studying medicine. Vivian had died 3 years after Clara's wedding. The letter from Edmund was brief, factual. Clara felt nothing when she read it, just a quiet sense of closure. Clara never went back to the Whitlock estate. She didn't need to. She'd built something better. One evening, many years later, Clara stood at the window of her bedroom, the same window where she'd watched so many sunrises. The valley was green and gold in the fading light. The estate was filled with the sound of her children playing somewhere below. Rowan was in his study, probably still working even though she'd told him to stop hours ago. Life was good. Not perfect, but good. She heard footsteps behind her and turned. Rowan stood in the doorway, older now, his hair touched with gray, but his eyes still the same. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Clara smiled. "How far we've come." He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" Clara thought about the years of pain, the scars that still ached on cold mornings, the nightmares that still came sometimes, though less frequently now. "No," she said finally, "because all of it led me here, to you, to this life, to them." She gestured toward the hall where their children's laughter echoed. "Even the hard parts?" "Especially the hard parts. They taught me who I am, what I'm capable of, what I deserve." Rowan kissed the top of her head. "You deserve everything." "So do you." They stood there as the sun set, watching the light fade over the valley they'd built together. Clara thought about the girl she'd been, invisible, broken, convinced she was nothing, and she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, free. The journey between those two versions of herself had been brutal, painful, full of moments when she'd wanted to give up. But she hadn't. She'd survived. She'd healed. She'd chosen to be better than what had been done to her. And now, standing in her home with the man she loved and the family they'd built, Clara knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found what she'd been searching for her entire life. Not just safety, not just love, not just freedom, purpose. She'd taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and transformed it into something beautiful. She'd proven that survival was only the beginning, and what came after, what you chose to become, that was everything. Clara tightened her grip on Rowan's hand and smiled. She was home, and she was never letting it go.